Hi, my name is Oscar Gill. I'm going to be talking about Second Amendment, the importance and complications or challenges of the Second Amendment, and I'm going to be using Robert E. Shullup's Ideological Origins of the Second Amendment as reference. I'm going to be using page 599, 600, 613, and 614. Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Since its ratification in 1791, the Second Amendment remained in relative obscurity, virtually ignored by the Supreme Court. The amendment has been termed obsolete, defunct, and an unused provision with no meaning for the 20th century by scholars dealing with the Bill of Rights. And yet many Americans consider the amendment as vital to their liberties today as they did the founders nearly 200 years ago. The sense of urgency arises for the current debate over gun control. Disagreements over gun legislation reveal disparate perceptions of American society that rest upon or inspire dissimilar interpretations of the Second Amendment. Opponents of the restrictive measures emphasize free and individual rights and privileges, and adamantly contend that the right to bear arms phrase constitutes the essence of the amendment. The bumper stickers, modern day ones that say, "When guns are outlawed, only outlawed will have guns," or "Hitler got his start registering guns." These simplistic ideas, symbolic of much deeper and more complex ideological beliefs, gave substance from a wide variety of popular sources. It is the NRA's National Rifle Association, however, that transformed the popular impulse into one of the most powerful and active lobbies in Washington. Its magazine, The American Rifleman, clearly states that the issue, the NRA, the foremost guardian of the traditional American right to keep and bear arms, believes that every law-abiding citizen is entitled to the ownership and legal use of firearms. For their part, advocates of the restrictive gun legislation emphasize the collective rights and communal responsibilities. In order to protect our society from the violence and associate with armed individuals, these people stress the well-regulated militia phrase within the Second Amendment. Irving Brandt's The Bill of Rights typifies this position, claiming that the Second Amendment, popular misread, comes to life chiefly on parade floats of a rifle association. Brand contends that the amendment's true purpose was to forbid Congress to prohibit the maintenance of state militia. Therefore, by its very nature, that amendment cannot be transformed into personal right to bear arms enforceable by federal compulsion upon the states. The President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice reiterates this belief even more forcefully. The U.S. Supreme Court and lower federal courts have consistently interpreted the Second Amendment only as a prohibition against federal interference with state militia, not as a guarantee of individuals' rights to keep or carry firearms. Therefore, the Commission concluded that the argument of the Second Amendment prohibits states or federal regulation, of citizen ownership of firearms has no validity whatsoever. This bifurcation of the Second Amendment into its two separate phrases invariably rests upon appeals to history. Advocates of both sides draw upon the same historical data but interpret them differently in light of their present-day beliefs. Opponents of gun control keep emphasizing the individualistic character of the founders, whereas the supporters of the restrictive legislation keep insisting that these men were far more concerned with the collective behavior of the Americans. Given this impasse, in an attempt to understand the origins of the amendment within the perspective of the late 18th century rather than that of the late 20th century, should provide useful insight into both beliefs of the founders and the intent of the amendment. Thomas Jefferson said, "What country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms," he said. In the nearly 200 years since the ratification of the Bill of Rights, American society has undergone great transformation. As a consequence, the number of people enjoying the expanded civic rights and responsibilities, including the ownership of firearms, which Jefferson and others felt should be restricted to freemen, has vastly increased. This has become the source of much controversy. Speaking for those alarmed by the presence of so many armed citizens, Senator Edward Kennedy believes that our complex society requires rethinking of the proper role of the firearms in modern America. Our forefathers used firearms as an integral part of their struggle for survival, but today firearms are not used appropriate for daily life in the United States. For his part, Edward Abbey, eloquent spokesman for the individualism, fears that measures suggested by Senator Kennedy to cope with today's complex society may be taking America in the direction of a worldwide drift toward totalitarianism. In his mind, throughout the history, whenever tyrannical governments existed and where few ruled many, citizens have been disarmed. The tank, the B-52, the fighter bomber, state-controlled police, and military are the weapons of dictatorship. The rifle is the weapon of democracy. Then, if guns are outlawed, only the government will have guns. Only the police, the secret police, the military, the hired servants of our rulers. Only the government and a few outlaws. I tend to be among those outlaws. Whether the armed citizen is relevant to the late 20th century American life is something that only American people through the Supreme Court, through state legislators and Congress can decide. Those who advocate some measure of gun control are not without powerful argument to advance on behalf of their position. The appalling and unforeseen destructive capability of modern weapons, the dissolving of the connection between armed citizenry and agrarian setting that figured so importantly in the thought of the revolutionary generation, the distinction between the right to keep arms and such measures as registration, the general recognition of the responsibility of succeeding generations to modify the constitutional inheritance to meet the conditions, all will be serviceable in the ongoing debate. But advocates of control of firearms should not argue that the Second Amendment does not intend for Americans of the 18th century or to possess arms for their own personal defense, for the defense of the states and their nation, for the purpose of keeping their rulers sensitive to the rights of the people. Now, Alan Keyes also wrote in August 1998, if we end violence in our land, if we want to end violence in our land, we must warm the hearts of all Americans with a renewed dedication to the God-given equality of human beings. We must recapture the noble view of man as capable of moral responsibility and self-restraint, of assuming responsibility for governing himself. This is the real meaning of the Second Amendment, and indeed the entire project of orderly liberty. It is the business of every citizen to preserve justice in his heart, and the material capacity, including arms, to resist tyranny. These things constitute our character as a free people, which is our duty to maintain, and to fulfill our duty to be such people we shall have to return to the humble subjection of the authority of the true moral principles that characterized by our founders. And that characterization, every generation of Americans until now, we must regain control of ourselves. Most deeply, the assertion of the Second Amendment rights is an assertion that we intend to control ourselves and submit to the moral order that God has decreed must govern our lives. And just as we have no right to shirk our duty to submit to the moral order, so we have no right to shirk our duty to preserve unto ourselves the material means to discipline our government, if necessary, so that it remains a fit instrument for the self-government of free people. The preservation of the Second Amendment rights for the right reasons is a moral and public duty of every citizen. That was Alan Keyes. My personal thought on the Second Amendment was the Bill of Rights was guaranteed to the people of America, and we need to continue abiding by the Bill of Rights. It was put there for a reason. We had a tyrannical government in England that stepped over the colonial Americans, and we didn't want that to ever happen again. And the founding fathers saw that perhaps our own government would someday be like that, and they wanted to protect the people from that. And the Second Amendment is that right. Thank you.